So you talk in your prior book, Changing World Order, about the historical relationship between external conflict as a cycle that seems to follow or flow with this financial cycle. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what's going to happen between the United States and China, given the condition in the US today. Do we have a higher propensity when things are difficult at home? Folks tend to go to war. War is stimulatory. Is that a driver here? And what's going to happen functionally with China over the next decade, do you think, in the US?
There's a cycle that has to do with changes in money and all of these things, where you don't have enough money. You need money to support international conflict. You need money to make domestic people happy. And then there's no power, there's no system for making judgments internationally. The United Nations doesn't work. The World Health Organization, they don't work. So there's no system. So you come into this power. So when we're talking about the financial problems that we're talking about that we covered, and recognize that that's worldwide, and then you have the polarity worldwide that has to do with different wealth and values, and you have that problem within the population, and then you have no rule system internationally. So it is a might is right series. You have that confluence of things, particularly now. Then there's disruptions, big disruptions, technology. We talked about how you can't lose the technology war because you'll lose the military war. All of that stress and shortage of what is perceived to be needed is incendiary. It's a risky situation. Of course, productivity helps, but it was like, you have to understand, put it in its place. The 1920s, leading up to the stock market bubble, that was the decade that we had the greatest number of inventions, patents, innovation, great productivity increases, while we simultaneously had big debt increases, and we simultaneously had these wealth gap and values increases. And so you don't get away from that. So this is going to be a lot of tension in a world where it's difficult to get all the parties to cooperate. In wars, if you look at history, when I say wars, there are military wars and then there's less than military wars. And I can't tell you that we're going to go into military wars. I think like the Soviet Union and the United States, because of the risk of mass destruction, it was able to avoid those. But in history, it's going to be a very difficult period.
You describe in your book the difference between how the United States goes to war and how China goes to war. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you speak to the U.S. goes to war head to head, open confrontation, whereas China is much more like a Sun Tzu art of war style. It's a little bit more tricky, a little bit more careful. They never let you know what they're going to do. Is that a fair characterization?
Right. Yeah. The general belief of the Chinese on the art of war, and this has existed throughout, and it exists today, is that if you're going into a fighting war, you must not have been smart enough to win without a fighting war. And you win through deception and manipulation, because fighting wars are going to damage you a lot. You don't want to be damaged. You want to get to your objective. So that's how they fight wars. Sounds like a smart way to fight wars. Also, international relations, there's what's called the tribute system. And the tribute system was your power determines where you are in your hierarchy. If you have more power, you have more hierarchy. You're higher in the hierarchy. It's like Confucian. And and everybody should know what each other's power is. And the lesser power should give tribute to the greater power. This is internationally. And the greater power should respect that and treat, and they should work and have harmony together rather than to have the conflict. Because it's all about getting what you want. Harmony and prosperity is what you want, and fighting that destroys things is not what you want. Whereas, the man who was vice president, great historian of China, a man by the name of Wang Xishan, described it to me that there's the Mediterranean approach.
Right, that's what it was, yeah.
And the Mediterranean approach, which is a very different approach, really began out of that there were families and there's no borders. And the way it worked is there were no limitations. In fact, we didn't have countries with borders and ideas that you don't cross borders until what's the Peace of Westphalia after in the mid 17th century. I think it was like 1650 something. They had 30 years of war and everybody would fight. So they were fighting experts, and that's what the norm was. And then after 30 years of war, they decided, okay, let's draw a boundary around it and try to see what goes on. And then there's your business. And that's how it came about. So, and that's, by the way, in history, one of the reasons that the Chinese and Japanese lost, and they had what they called their 100 years of humiliation when the foreign powers came in late 1830s, and they had a fight, the Opium Wars and so on. The Western powers were strong at fighting because they were practiced at it. And then there was the 100 years of humiliation, they call it in China, where the foreign powers came in. So anyway, I'm giving you too much history, but I'm saying that there's a whole different attitude about how to play that game. And so that's what I think you're going to see. You know, that's when we come back now to the chips war and you look at today's news, you know, there we are.